got some closures that I'd like to show you. This one is a shepherd's hook style that I've made with a single wire that was 16 gauge, and I've used copper, but you could use whatever type wire you like. Then these two I did with 20 gauge wire, and these two have a double wire on the hook part, so that makes them really strong, even though they're very dainty and delicate. This one was modeled after a vintage clasp in a necklace that I have, and I just wanted something a little bit smaller than my typical hook that I could use when I want to make something really fine. So that's what these are, and these are all really nice basic clasps to know how to make, and I'm sure they're going to come in handy when you're designing jewelry. I'm going to be making this single wire clasp first, and I've got my 16 gauge copper here, and I'm going to cut 6 inches of it, and I'm going to flush cut it on each end so that I have a nice flat cut to work with. And the first thing that I'll do is with a little paddle on one end, and I'm going to use my extra long round nose pliers to make a small loop in that end. And I'm just looping the wire all the way around until it touches. So now I'm going to have my little small loop facing me. I'm going to put my wire into the back of my extra long round nose pliers, and I'm going to support my wire with my fingers in the back and then with my thumb in the front, and using my hand I'm going to go forward and just make a nice shepherd's hook. And you notice that when I got too far and my hand was in an uncomfortable position, I open my pliers, spin it back, and then move forward again. So there's my shepherd's hook. And now what I'll do is take my chain nose pliers, and I'm going to make a 90-degree angle. I'm going to start right underneath my whole hook here. And you can either bend your wire this direction or this direction to the side. So I usually just do it to the side, and that way I end up with my shepherd's hook going one direction and my loop down here at the bottom going the other direction. So I'll show you what I mean. And I'm going to bend my wire over the tops of my pliers as opposed to bending the wire with the pliers. I'm just going to bend my wire right over the tops of my pliers like that. So now I've got this 90-degree angle here, which is optimum for making a nice round loop that's centered. So now I'll put my extra long round nose back in up against that bend that I just made, and I'm going to go maybe a little bit less than halfway into my pliers, and wherever you put your wire into your pliers, that's going to determine the size of this bottom loop here. So if you want a larger loop, you'll want to put your wire in toward the box. If you want a smaller loop, you're going to want to do it toward the middle or toward the end. So I guess a little bit of a medium-sized loop here. I'm going to be bending the wire over the tops of my pliers with this finger, and also this creates kind of a squeezing motion as I'm pressing with my thumb as well. So now I've come all the way here, and I can't go any farther. So I'm going to open my pliers without taking my wire off the pliers, spin my hand to the back, and now I can continue around and get a nice round loop there. And if it's not quite in the center, you'll want to give it a little crank back this way, and then just bring that wire down and out. So now what I've got is another 90-degree angle and a really nice round loop there. And I'm going to grasp my loop with my chain nose pliers, and I'm going to grab the end of my wire, and I'm just going to crank it around a couple times. And since this wire is rather heavy, I will make a nice neat wrap as opposed to a messy one. Now, if you were going to use 18 gauge wire, you could probably make an overlapping wrap there, make it a little bit more messy, which is what I usually like. But this wire is pretty heavy, so I'm not going to be able to do a large wrap because it'll just be too bulky. So once I get that wrap, I'm going to go in close and trim that. Now you can see I've got probably about 2 inches of wire left, and I started out with 6, so a little small clasp this size probably would have been okay with 5 inches. So if you're using sterling, you might want to keep that in mind. So now I'm just going to squeeze that end a little bit so that it's not sticking out quite so much. And I've got my shepherd's hook shaped and my loop at the bottom shaped. And now I want to do a little bit of hammering on this. So I'll bring in my bench block. And I'm just going to hammer the top of the shepherd's hook. And that'll make it nice and sturdy. That'll harden the wire. It won't go anywhere. And it's on my piece of jewelry. Also, I think it looks nice. But you can see that it's opened my clasp up a little bit, so I can take my chain nose pliers and just kind of adjust that a little bit back down. And then the other thing that you can do is flatten this bottom loop also. Now, if you're going to use beading wire on this to connect your necklace, you probably will want to leave this round, because if you flatten it, those sharp edges are going to possibly cut into your beading wire. So if I'm attaching beading wire here, I will leave this round. But if I'm going to attach, say, a wire wrapped link, then sometimes I like to flatten that a little bit just because I like the look of it. And also, if you're using a smaller gauge wire, that will harden that a little bit more. So there we have our hook. And you can do a little bit more adjusting with your chain nose pliers if you need to. And since my wire already had a liver of sulfur patina on it, now I'll give it a little buffing with my manicure pad here. And this one's ready to go. So I'm going to start out by cutting my 6 inches of 20 gauge wire, and I'm going to flush cut both ends of it, just because that's a good way to start. And I'm going to use my chain nose pliers, and I'm going to place them about, 2/3 of the way up on the wire, on the length of wire. I'm just going to bend that wire in half, just like that. And then I want this loop right here to be closed, so I'll take my chain nose pliers and just gently squeeze that closed. And I also want the rest of this wire to lay down right next to each other, so I'm just going to kind of adjust that with my fingers to make sure that that's nice and straight. And then I can go over it with my pliers a little bit too to make sure that those are lying next to each other. Once you have your small loop at the end here and you've got your wire fairly straightened out and together, just give that little loop a couple of whacks to flatten it just a little bit, and that will really help to harden this wire and keep that little loop together and keep it from splaying. Then I'll take my extra long round nose pliers and place the wire, quarter of the way up or so, and I'm just going to give this loop a little slight bend upward, just like that. That's all. Then I'll place my wire into the jaws about the same place, about a quarter of the way, but you can see that I'm a little bit farther down from that bend that I just made. because I want my, my hook to actually be sort of a long shape. And I'm just going to support my wire with my fingers in the back and my thumb in the front. And then I'm going to gently turn that loop right around until it touches in the front, just like that. Okay, so now I've got a short wire and a long wire. I'm going to use the long wire for wrapping, and I'm going to trim off the short wire. So the short one, let's do the long one first. Right up above where the hook meets, I'm going to place my chain nose pliers into the wire and bend it out to the side at a 90-degree angle, just like that. And that leaves me with the short wire sticking up, which I don't want. What I want to do is make my loop, and then I'm going to use this longer wire to wrap over that shorter wire. So I'm just going to trim that shorter wire, not too short, but right about a little under where that bend is. So it's not even with the bend, it's just a little, I don't know if you can see that, it's just a little bit below where the bend is. Then I'm going to take my round nose pliers, and you can use your extra long round or just your regular. I'm going to make a small loop because this is a dainty clasp. So I'll put my wire in about 1/3 of the way up on my regular pliers, or if I were using my extra long round nose, about 1/4 of the way up. Personal preference. Just depends on how large you want your loop. And again, I've bent my wire over the top of my pliers. I can go no further, so I open my pliers, spin them back around, and then I continue on with my loop. And then I'm just going to bend my hand back a little bit to bring that loop right directly over the top of my clasp right here. So it's looking like a lollipop. That's how you want it to look. Now I'll take my chain nose pliers again and grasp that loop. And I still have my cut off short wire here, and I want to overwrap that now. So I'm just going to turn my longer wire just like a crank and grab that shorter wire. And if you have to open up this hook a little bit to do that, you can do that too. Get that wire tucked under there. And then I'm going to trim that long wire so that it's flush. And then I'll just tuck that right in. And if you have any adjustments that need to be made, put your clasp back in to the jaws of your round pliers and make those adjustments. And then, of course, I can hit it with my sanding block to get some of that patina off and give it a nice shine. So like I said, you can make this loop bigger, a little bit bigger. With this one, I used the back of my extra long round nose pliers. With this one, I used the extra long round nose pliers about 1/4 or 1/3 of the way. So it just gives it a little bit different look, but they're both very delicate and great to use with a more delicate piece of jewelry.